soul cries out with a joyful shout, for the God of my heart is great. And my spirit sings of the wondrous things that you bring to the ones who wait. You fixed your sight on the servant's plight, and my weakness you could not spurn. So from east to west shall my name be blessed, could the world be about to turn. My heart shall sing of the day we bring, let the fires of your justice burn. Wipe away your tears, for the drawn doors near, the world is about to turn.
People last week wanted to know where the samples of the Maker's Mark bourbon was that I was going to pass out. And, the series is inspired by really an extraordinary story about how Maker's Mark bourbon came to be. But we're looking at how this markedly different bourbon set itself apart from all the other ones before it. But we are looking specifically at how God calls us to be markedly different people than other people, and the extraordinary part of that story, and particularly in Matthew's Gospel, as we learn about the disciples and how just how hard it was, and some of the first struggles they had in trying to figure figure out how they were going to be markedly different people. So as I said last week, it's a little bit of a bait and switch, but no bourbon samples. We're having Bible samples, okay? So these are your samples. They're in the Bible. We are going to be sampling God's Word, God's Word to us, and how we can be markedly different people because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we started last week with Peter's declaration, in effect, burning the family recipe of what a Messiah was, and having this radically new idea of who a Messiah is in Jesus Christ. And we're going to continue with that story today. So remembering that Peter has just been named by Jesus, and in fact his name is Simon, son of Jonah, but Jesus gives him a new name, just like Maker's Mark Bourbon is a new name because it used to be T.W. Samuel's Bourbon. Peter gets a new name because he's a whole new person because of this confession he's made, because of this radical change that he's made in his life about what a Messiah is. And Jesus has said, you're not Simon anymore, now you're Peter, and as a matter of fact, the reason you're Peter is because Peter in Greek means rock, and you are a rock, you are who I am founding my church on. So this is important for today's lesson as this continues. So here's Peter, Pope Peter the First, okay, of the church, and we're going to continue in Matthew 16, verses 21 and following, after Jesus has named Simon Peter the first leader of his church. Now from that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But Jesus turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And then Jesus told his disciples, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? For what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels in the glory of his Father. And then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The word of God for the people of God. You failed. You did not clear all the jelly. If you've ever played Candy Crush on your tablet or your smartphone or your computer, my guess is you have seen this picture. You failed. You did not clear all the jelly. It is the message I receive more often than not when I play Candy Crush. And the first time, when I first started playing this game, the first time I ever said that out loud, you failed. You did not clear all the jelly. That's how I say it so that I don't get so depressed about how poorly I'm playing. My husband David was nearby and he had not started playing the game yet. He knew what I was doing. He said, "No way, does it really say that?" I said, "Yeah." I turned my tablet where you could see the little girl with her all sad face. I said, "Look at this face. She's even showing you how sad she is that you failed. You did not clear all the jelly." And David goes, "Wow, that's harsh." That's kind of how I think Peter must have felt when Jesus turned to him and called him Satan in our text this morning. Wow, that's harsh. I mean, talk about failure. Peter goes from being Pope Peter the First to Satan himself in one fell swoop. 1 minute he's holding the keys to the kingdom, and the next moment he's Lucifer in chief. I mean, come on. Peter failed. And what gets me is that he failed because he didn't want Jesus to fail. Did you get that? Peter failed because he didn't want Jesus to fail. I mean, what's wrong with that? He didn't want Jesus to undergo great suffering at the hands of the scribes and the Pharisees and the chief priests. He didn't want Jesus to die, even if he was going to be raised on the third day, which I dare say he didn't understand at the moment. He didn't want Jesus to undergo great suffering or to die. And who could blame him? Well, as a matter of fact, Jesus blamed him. Which is hard for me. I don't like to think about Jesus blaming anybody. But he does. And he doesn't just blame Jesus, he blames all of us who would be disciples. In our text, it says, then Jesus told his disciples, not just Peter, but all of his disciples. And as Matthew is writing this gospel to his community, that's code word for, I'm telling you too, you people who belong to the First Christian Church of Matthew. And then for all of us who continue to read this, I'm telling this to you too, Twin Pines Christian Church. If any want to be my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. In the words of David, wow, that's kind of harsh. I mean, I give Nan a lot of props for putting that on a kid's level. It's hard. I mean, no wonder some people aren't interested in the Church of Christianity anymore, especially the way some people take this and the way they live it out. I mean, for some folks, it's given into a seemingly masochistic love of pain and suffering, all in the name of faith, far too often causing us, some people, particularly oppressed people, to continue to experience suffering and not demand justice because, well, I'm suffering for Jesus. Or have some horrid view of, well, God's making me suffer so I can learn something. Kind of harsh. By human logic, many Christians are nothing but hapless fools blindly following Jesus to the gallows. And believe it or not, we even get this view in the Bible. There's probably no better caricature of this idea than the disciple Thomas in John's Gospel. And not the famous one where he says, you know, I'm not going to believe unless you show me your hands and your feet. This is back before that, when Lazarus is sick. And Jesus has heard about it, but he decides not to go. And then he decides he is going to go a few days later. And he says to the disciples, I've got to go back to Judea. My friend Lazarus is sick. And they all said, in a heartbeat, Jesus, the people there want to kill you. Why would you want to do that? It's not a good idea. Don't go there. And Jesus said, well, but Lazarus is dead. And I've got to go to him. And Thomas says, well, let's go too. We might as well die with him. Now, for a lot of us, we've been taught to believe that that's just this ultra faithful, like, I'm going to go die with Jesus. I'm going to carry my cross and be just like Jesus. If we read it that way, we're missing the tremendous comic relief that John is trying to provide us. Y'all, Thomas is like the Eeyore of the Gospels. I mean, let's go too. We might as well die with him. It's so absurd that it's common. From a human point of view, losing is losing. Suffering is suffering. Dying is dying. Period. It's bad. Don't risk it. Don't go there. And yet we all know that even from a human point of view, sometimes there's some things in life worth risking, even just for pleasure and enjoyment. I shared with you last week the story of how Maker's Mark bourbon got its name when Bill Samuels burned the 170-year-old family recipe because he wanted to make a bourbon that wouldn't blow your ears off, as his wife Margie was famous for saying. He wanted to make something that was markedly different. That's how it got its name, Maker's Mark. What I didn't tell you last week is that he sold the rights to the old family business, T.W. Samuels & Son, and the property and everything related to it, and burned that recipe before he ever distilled a single drop of what would come to be known as Maker's Mark. Some people say that's getting the cart before the horse. And in fact, not only before he'd ever distilled a drop, before he even had a place to distill a drop. He didn't have a distillery, he didn't have machinery, he didn't have anything except really an idea. And a bunch of bread he and Margie had baked together. He didn't even have bourbon. All he had was an idea and bread recipe. Story I've heard is that he went to the bank to get a loan to finance his new venture. And keep in mind back then, bourbon was kind of harsh, okay? I mean, it was rough. And he went to the bank manager to get this loan to finance this new, better tasting bourbon. And the bank manager said, Bill, what if I told you I'd invented a new fantastic kind of Brussels sprouts? To which Bill said, I hate Brussels sprouts. And the banker said, exactly. Now you know why you're not getting a loan from us. But Bill was undeterred. As the story goes, he had two advantages. Number one, he cared more about craftsmanship than about money. And two, he was a remarkably persistent man, although I suspect some folks might have called that stubborn. He spent 6 years, not 6 months, not 6 days, 6 years developing a recipe and beginning to do some experimentation. After some small fires and considerable trial and error, Maker's Mark that we know today was born. But even after he sold the first bottle in 1958, it was almost 10 years, 1967, before he ever turned even a meager profit. And that was only because he wasn't paying the master distiller himself, or the marketing genius, his wife Margie, any kind of salary at all. 10 years of a deficit venture. That's a long, long time. Add to that 6 years of just research. 16 years from the time that he burned the 170-year-old recipe and sold the rights. It turned out to be worth the risk. And yet, I try to imagine if I'd been his wife. It's amazing she didn't kill him. For his children, for his friends. What would today it's real easy to go, oh, it was worth the risk. I mean, come on, look at this great business he built. It's an empire. My goodness. Do you think people thought that the first year, the second year, the third year, the fourth year, the fifth year, the 10th year, the 12th year, the 15th year? It could have been a dismal failure. And as a matter of fact, may have felt like, you failed, you did not make all the bourbon. It may have felt like that to him. He could have sentenced himself and his family to ridicule and poverty. But he had a vision, and he had a taste of that vision, and he thought that that was worth risking for. So my question for us is there something in life that is worth risking failure for? Dan talks to the children about sometimes we lose our friends. Well, look, I know some folks who had to quit drinking Maker's Mark because it was ruining their life. They had to say, I'm not drinking another drop of alcohol ever again. You know what that meant for a lot of those folks and still means? It means losing a lot of friends. Because I'm a new person and I got to have a new way of living. It was certainly worth the risk to quit drinking and lose friends rather than lose a life. Which brings me more to the point of what Jesus is getting at. Not only what in life is worth risking failure for, but in the words of Jesus, what in life is worth dying for? What in life is, as Nan said to the children, what in life is worth giving up so that we will ultimately not lose our life, our soul, even if we physically die? Many of you know my husband David worked as a hospice chaplain for 5 years. One of the things I distinctly remember him telling me over and over and over again is that nobody on their deathbed ever talked about how they wish they'd spent more time at work. Nobody on their deathbed ever talked about how big their house was or what kind of car they had or how much money they made. What they did talk about was their regrets and their fears. It makes me wonder, what kind of life, when we get to our deathbed, do we need to have so that we would have no regret? What kind of life, when we get to our deathbed, would be one where we have no fear? Now, I do think there's all kinds of examples of this. Some are intense. Some are small. And I think it's trial and error to figure it out. I think sometimes we make mistakes when we're trying to figure out what in life is worth risking for and what's going to give us no regrets and no fears. I think, particularly in Christianity, sometimes we have a bad habit of making it sound like you've got to jump off a bridge every day to follow Jesus, and that it's not that clear, and that's really not what Jesus is asking for anyway. But I guess what I want to get at is, just like with Bill Samuels, he had this idea that, and this taste of what he wanted, and he stayed with that no matter how many times he failed. It's the times that he failed that told him what he needed to do differently to get to what he wanted. And I think so with us too, that when we're trying to figure this out, yeah, sometimes we're going to fail. Sometimes we're going to do stuff and we're going to go, well, that's not worth my life. That's not worth risking for. I mean, that's how we learn. But when we figure it out, I mean, it's like powerful, amazing. And there's many examples of that, but one in particular I want to share with you that I just became aware of this last week, and you hear one of these kind of stories and you're like, man, that'll preach. And it's inspiring to me, and I know it's inspiring to you, and many of you may have seen this in the paper. If you're friends with Caroline Hale, our own Caroline Hale, of the famed Walter Hale, or should I say of the famed sister of Jane Smith, or should I just say Moorhead? Because if you just say Moorhead, you know. Caroline's daughter-in-law, Marcy, Kelly's partner, Marcy Smith, had surgery this week. Marcy had voluntary surgery this week to give her kidney to a co-worker at her school who needed a transplant to save his life. Ivan Graves, a custodian at West Jessamine High School, has been on dialysis for the last 5 years. And for months he has needed a kidney donor. Can you imagine his surprise when he found one in, of all places, his workplace? Marcy is the curriculum resource administrator at West Jessamine and has known Ivan for years. In the article in the paper that I read, she said she'd often thought of being an organ donor, and when she found out that Ivan needed a kidney, she knew the day had come. According to the article, Marcy said, "I'll never forget Ivan's face when we found out we were a match. And just the joy in his face and the joy in his life that I've seen since, it's unmatched. To be able to bring upon somebody that kind of joy. Yeah. It's hard to even say how much that means to me and how blessed I feel. And then Ivan said, it'll be the happiest day of my life, besides when I got married and my kids were born. It'll be like that, the happiest day of my life, because I'm getting a new life. Now, if you're on Facebook, you've maybe seen this picture. If you cannot read that from where you're sitting or see that, you have Marcy's white arm and Ivan's black arm grasping hands with one another, and a t-shirt that I'm suspecting is Calvin's. Sorry, Calvin. Ivan, similar. That is Ivan's t-shirt. I'm a Louisville fan, but my kidney bleeds blue. Yeah, you think the angle on this story would be that Marcy was white and Ivan was black? But oh no. Black and white, that ain't nothing to Cardinals versus Cats. I mean, that a UK fan would give their kidney to a Louisville fan. And that a Louisville fan would take a kidney from a UK fan. I mean, I'm telling you, second coming is coming right now. I mean, we are here. And both Marcy and Ivan, either one of them or both, could have died in this surgery. Either one or both of them could have died in this surgery. Either one or both of them could have had, if they didn't die, could have had complications from this surgery that could have caused a lot of pain and suffering. It could have been, you failed. But what I am getting from this article and from what Caroline has told me, both Marcy and Ivan were willing to risk failure and even death because Ivan's life was worth dying for. Because giving Ivan a second chance at a quality, quote, normal life was worth dying for. What are we willing to risk for? What is worth dying for? Last week I asked you to take rocks and to write your name on them to represent that you were like Peter, you were rocky, on whom Jesus could build his church, and you thought about the marked difference that Jesus was going to make in your life, and you left some of the rocks at the altar because you knew you needed some things that you needed to leave behind if you're going to make that marked difference in your life, and you took some of the rocks with you because you knew that you were going to have to take some things out of this place to be the markedly different kind of person that Jesus was calling you to be. Today, I'm just going to pass this basket of rocks around that the kids decorated for us with crosses. I wanted to tell the children that if they wanted to count crosses, they had a whole bunch they could count right here. I want you to take a rock with a cross. If you want, you can take more than one as it goes around. And I do want you to take this home with you. You might even want to leave it in your car if that's where you spend a lot of your time. But I want you to keep this somewhere with you and think, what is worth risking failure for? What is worth risking my life for? What matters so much that I would labor for 16 years trying to get it right? That I would be willing to have a bunch of failures just to get one shot at success? What matters that much?